It wasn't supposed to be my phone call, but I heard it anyway. Through the thin drywall, just past the kitchen hallway, I caught the tone in my son's voice before I understood the words. Quiet, cautious, like he was trying to put out a fire before it spread. "She doesn't need to go," he said. "It'll be too much for her." I froze, dish towel in hand, standing half-turned from the sink, the faucet still dripping behind me. The words drifted from the living room like smoke, curling their way into my chest and settling there, thick and sour. My heart beat once, then again, slower, louder. "She's been so tired lately," his wife added, softer. "You know how she gets." The silence that followed said everything else. No one disagreed. No one said my name. No one asked. They'd answered the call on speakerphone, not realizing I was close enough to hear every syllable. Or maybe they did realize, and counted on me pretending I hadn't. I didn't cry. Not then. I just stood there in the quiet after, surrounded by the slow tick of the wall clock and the soft hum of the refrigerator, the kind of quiet that presses on your ribs until breathing feels optional. My sister, my only sister, was gone, and I wasn't invited to say goodbye. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, tracing the ceiling cracks like veins, the ones that run like soft rivers above me, twisting with time. My fingers curled around the edge of the blanket she made me, the year our father died, thick wool, mustard yellow, too scratchy for anyone else in the family. But I loved it because she'd sewn it with the leftover fabric from her old college scarf. She'd joked it was ugly, and I'd said, "So are you." And we laughed so hard we cried. She was the only one who could make me laugh like that. She was the only one who knew what our mother whispered when the lights went out. She knew about the chipped tooth I never fixed, and the reason I always sit facing the exit. She knew the sound I make when I try not to cry. Now, no one does. And still, my name wasn't on the ticket. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table while they packed. Garment bags rustled, and umbrellas thudded softly onto the floor by the front door. I heard whispered instructions about arrival times and flower deliveries. I poured my tea with hands that didn't shake and watched the steam curl upward like a ghost trying to leave the room. Nobody looked up. Nobody asked if I had a dress, or if I had shoes, or a plan. As they zipped the suitcases, I looked down at the lined notepad beside my mug and wrote 2 words in the margin. "I'm going." No one told me I couldn't, but they didn't have to. They'd already decided I wouldn't. And that, I think, is what cracked something loose in me. Not rage, not defiance, just this deep, clean certainty that I would go not because I was welcome, but because I was still her sister. Because love doesn't need permission slips. Because when you've spent your whole life being told to sit out, sometimes standing in the rain is the only way to be seen. The kitchen smelled like lemons and starch. My daughter had been ironing the children's clothes, the scent of the spray lingering in the air like memory. I stood just outside the doorway, holding my tea, watching the way she moved quickly between the sink and the counter, efficient, focused, humming faintly to herself. My son sat at the table, laptop open, fingers dancing over keys, like a man late for something. He wasn't usually this involved in details, always left the planning to his wife. But this time, he was in charge. That told me everything I needed to know. I took a slow sip, pretending not to see the papers fanned out beside his elbow. A list, neatly printed, airline itineraries, hotel confirmations, names and room numbers. 3 of them. Does she want an aisle seat or window? My daughter asked, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. She won't mind either, he said, without looking up. Just give her the one next to Zoe. She, not me, not Mom. They were talking about his wife's cousin from Spokane, the one who always sends scented Christmas cards and once called me Mildred for an entire weekend. I stood there, holding that cup like it could steady me. What about, I began, meaning to say what about me, but I stopped, because that would have made it awkward, because they hadn't said it outright, hadn't declared me unfit or unwanted. They just left me out, like you might leave off the parsley when garnishing a plate. Not essential, not missed. The laptop chimed. My son leaned forward. We'll need to leave early to catch the 7:15. Should give us enough time to meet the hearse before the procession. My daughter nodded, writing it down. Should we pack Zoe's black tights, or just go with the gray ones? I'd say gray. Black's too heavy for a kid. The conversation rolled on without pause, smooth and practiced. They didn't notice me step back into the hallway. My tea had gone cold, anyway. Later that afternoon, I stood by the coat closet, pretending to sort scarves. My black one was missing. I'd worn it last to church the winter before, when the pipes froze and the pastor preached in gloves. I thought about that now, how we'd huddled near the radiators and laughed because what else could we do? My sister had sat beside me, elbows touching, and whispered, "This is what faith feels like, cold toes and warm hearts." Now they were packing for her funeral, and I couldn't find my scarf. I heard them talking in the bedroom upstairs, the light murmur of zippers, the rustle of garment bags. No raised voices, no arguments. Just the sound of things being prepared without me. A suitcase thudded against the banister. I moved back into the kitchen. My son passed through a moment later, glancing at his phone, then at the clock. "We're thinking of bringing your raincoat," he said absently, reaching for his keys. "It might drizzle." "Yours or mine?" I asked. He looked up, startled. "Oh, I meant Zoe's. Sorry, thought you were in the other room." I nodded. He smiled, tight-lipped, then disappeared down the hallway again. That night, I sat at the dining table and looked at the folded linens still waiting to be packed. The black umbrella leaned against the wall, like it was embarrassed to be part of this. I pulled out my notepad and wrote her name at the top. Joan. No last name, no dates, just Joan. Because to me, she was never a statistic. She was 13 and singing off-key in our shared bedroom. She was 30 and buying her first couch with money, saved from night shifts. She was 62 and crying on my porch after her second divorce, holding a bag of takeout and a bottle of white wine. I wrote the memories down like a ledger. My proof of presence. No one asked if I wanted to speak at the service. No one suggested I bring anything, but I would write something anyway, even if no one heard it but me. In the morning, the door creaked open and my daughter peeked in. "Hey," she said gently, "we're leaving around 8. Did you want us to bring anything back?" Bring anything back, not take anything with me. I smiled politely. "No, thank you." She hesitated. "You've been tired lately, Mom. It's a lot of travel. We didn't want you to feel overwhelmed." "Of course," I said. She gave that kind of smile people give when they think they're being kind. Then she was gone again. I sat still for a long while after that, the kind of still that seeps into your bones. Then I reached for the catalog on the counter. Found the coat I'd seen in the window last week. Long black with a high collar, waterproof. I clicked overnight shipping and typed in my address. The confirmation email arrived within minutes. When their car pulled out the next morning, I stood behind the lace curtain in the front window. They didn't wave. They didn't look back. The trunk was full, the children in matching shoes. They were dressed in grief, but not mine. The coat arrived an hour later. It was heavier than I expected. Good. Weight meant warmth. Weight meant it was real. I laid it across the back of the chair and sat down to write again. I loved you more than they knew, I scribbled on a fresh sheet. And I'm here, even if they didn't want me to be. The kettle hissed behind me. The rain tapped gently against the glass. I listened, not to their voices, but to the one in me that had grown too quiet for too long. The meals got smaller, not because I needed less, but because no one else was eating with me. I used to cook for 5 roast chicken with potatoes split open and steaming, green beans bright with lemon, dinner rolls wrapped in a tea towel to stay warm. I made pies on Tuesdays, lasagna on Thursdays, and set the table with cloth napkins when no one asked me to. There was something about the rhythm of it, the clatter of pans, the scent of garlic browning, the hum of purpose. That's how I marked time. Now, 1 egg, a heel of toast, a bowl of soup poured from a carton and reheated slowly so it wouldn't boil over, and still half of it cooled untouched on the counter while I wandered to check the mail or water the dying philodendron by the window. That plant used to bloom. So did I. I kept the routines, though, not because they were needed, but because they were mine. I'd wake at 6:45, not from an alarm, but from the sound of the newspaper hitting the driveway. Though no one read it anymore but me. I'd put the kettle on, boil water, pour it over the same brand of English breakfast I've been drinking since 1971. 2 sugars. No milk. At 7:10, I'd sit at the kitchen table with my notepad. Once upon a time, it was filled with grocery lists, lunch menus, appointments for the kids, summer camp deadlines. Then it became a place for Christmas gift ideas, book club notes, reminders to renew the water bill or send birthday cards to the grandkids. Now, it was mostly blank. The pen sat still beside it, waiting. I'd write down a quote some days, or a line from an old hymn I remembered while sweeping the porch. Other times, I'd write her name, Joan, sometimes underlined, sometimes not. The days had become soft-edged, shapeless. No one called before noon anymore. No one asked what I was doing that weekend. They assumed I wasn't doing anything, so they didn't bother checking. I wasn't angry about it, just noticing. It's a quiet thing, this kind of fading. You don't realize it all at once. You think, oh, they're just busy. You think, it's easier this way. You tell yourself you're proud they don't need you. But then one day you realize you've become something to be managed. Not included. They drop off leftovers in plastic containers and call it dinner. They send photos instead of invitations. They stop saying, we should get together soon. Even the lies fall away eventually. I saw it most clearly in the way my chair was moved. At dinner now, I didn't sit at the table anymore. Not really. They'd bring me a tray with a scoop of casserole and set it on the side table near the armchair. You're more comfortable here, right, Mom? And I'd smile, nod, take the fork and say thank you. But comfort is not the same as belonging, and no one asked which I wanted more. Joan would have noticed, She always did. She was the one who'd nudge me with her elbow when I started shrinking into corners. She'd say, "Don't let them make you background noise, Midge. You're the whole song." I hadn't heard that name in years. Midge. A nickname from childhood she'd stubbornly refused to let go of, even when I became Margaret to everyone else. She was the only person left who remembered what I was like at 9, at 19, at 40, standing in the rain with wet shoes and a broken umbrella outside the DMV because my husband had forgotten to pick me up. She'd been the one to drive across town without being asked. Now, they wouldn't even let me ride to her funeral. Evenings were the worst. I'd eat early, clean up in silence, watch the light drain from the sky behind the living room curtains. The television would flicker in the background, voices I didn't care about talking over each other. I rarely paid attention. The remote sat unused on the coffee table. I left it there, like maybe someone would walk in and say, "Want to watch something together?" They didn't. My son worked late. My daughter-in-law scrolled endlessly, thumbs moving faster than thought. The kids, when they noticed me, spoke to me like I was a substitute teacher they didn't expect to see again. One night, my granddaughter passed me in the hallway and said, "Oh, I thought you'd already gone to bed." It was 7:45. I'd begun collecting small indignities like souvenirs. A cracked mug they never replaced. A birthday card that said "best wishes" and nothing else. The chair with the wobble no one bothered to fix. My laundry folded by someone else and left in a plastic basket outside my door. They're just trying to help, I told myself. But help without kindness can feel like a warning, like a preamble to being moved. They hadn't said the word facility, but I felt it in the air sometimes. The way they talked around me instead of to me. The way they discussed me like a set of logistics. She gets overwhelmed. She needs more structure. Maybe next year we should. They never finished the sentence. They didn't need to. One morning, I overheard my son on the phone. "Honestly, I don't think she'll come," he said. "It's a lot, and she's not herself these days." He was talking about the funeral, about Joan, not herself. I almost laughed, 'cause I was more myself in grief than I'd been in years. And that's when I decided, if I didn't go, it would be like she'd never existed. Like we were never little girls on a porch, pinkies intertwined, whispering promises to always show up. I couldn't let that be our ending. Even if I wasn't wanted inside the chapel. Even if they told themselves they were protecting me from sorrow. Even if they erased my seat from the van and my name from the program. I would go. Because some promises you don't break, even when no one remembers you made them. The night before I left, I pulled down the photo box from the closet shelf. It was heavier than I remembered, not from the pictures themselves, but from everything they held. Paper memories don't age the way people do. They stay bright and sharp, like they're daring you to admit how much has changed. I sat at the table in the dim kitchen light, flipping through birthdays and baptisms, camping trips with soggy socks, and Joan's infamous marshmallow pies. The one where she forgot the chocolate and insisted we eat it anyway. I kept digging, searching for something I hadn't let myself see in years. And then there it was, tucked between an old holiday card and a faded program from a school play. I found it, a snapshot of Joan at my wedding. Her arm flung around my shoulder, laughing so hard her eyes were squeezed shut, her mouth wide open like a hymn. It wasn't a posed photo. Someone had caught us mid-laugh, cheeks flushed from dancing, the band still warming up behind us. She'd sung that night, not because we asked, not for a performance, just because the music called her to it. I can't help falling in love. Low and rich like honey, poured over stone. Her voice wasn't perfect. It caught sometimes on the high notes, but I'd never heard anything more beautiful. Half the room went quiet while she sang. My new husband squeezed my hand, and I remember thinking, this is the sound of being known. Afterward, she leaned in and whispered, that song's for you, Midge, so when you forget why you said yes, play it again. I never forgot. Not the song, not her. That was the last night I remember feeling necessary. It's not that the years that followed were unkind. Life moved forward. Children were born, jobs changed, houses filled and empty again. But something shifted slowly, so slowly I almost missed it. One by one, my titles disappeared. Wife, sister, mother. Not literally. I still had those roles. But the warmth behind them, the presence, the pull grew distant, like a lighthouse blinking from too far out to reach. People still said Mom or Grandma or even Mrs. Laird at the doctor's office. But it was said with habit, not affection. Said like a line on a chart, not a name in someone's heart. Joan was the last person who said Midge like it was a secret only we shared. The rest of them never asked where the name came from. Never knew it was short for midget, from when I was small and fierce and always trying to climb the tallest tree on the block. Joan gave it to me when I was 6 and insisted I keep it even after I grew taller than her by freshman year. Midge, she'd said once in college, holding my hand after I'd failed an exam and thought the world would end. You're not small anymore, but the name still fits. You don't quit. You climb. I kept that photo on the table the next morning while I packed. Not much, just the coat, the notepad, a pair of shoes that wouldn't slip in the rain, a change of clothes and my sister's brooch shaped like a dove. I pinned it to the inside of my coat where no one else could see it. It wasn't for them. It was for her. The journey started with the 8:05 bus. Not a train or a flight like they were taking, just a local route that stopped every 15 minutes for someone's groceries or doctor's appointment. 3 transfers, a total of 5 hours. The last leg took me through the part of town where we used to go shopping as teenagers. I saw the corner bakery where we bought ginger cookies too early in the season, and the park bench where she once broke up with a boy using nothing but a smile and a Twix bar. I caught my reflection in the window glass and barely recognized myself. But I didn't look away. There's something sacred about carrying grief the hard way. No shortcuts, no fast lanes. Just each stop, each mile, like a bead on a rosary, counted with purpose, endured with quiet devotion. At one of the transfer stations, I had 15 minutes to wait. The air was crisp, the kind of chill that kisses your cheeks before it bites. I sat on the wooden bench under a gray sky, watching pigeons pick at old popcorn by the curb. Beside me, a young woman was talking on her phone. Loudly. Something about an Airbnb cancellation and a rental car delay. She didn't notice me. Why would she? But as she turned to dig in her purse, she glanced down at my notepad. The words I'd written were visible in soft pencil lines. I loved you more than they knew. And I'm here, even if they didn't want me to be. She looked up. Our eyes met for just a moment. Then she gave a small nod. Not pity, not concern. Something else. Recognition, maybe. She didn't speak. Neither did I. But I closed the notepad slowly and placed it back in my coat pocket. Sometimes silence is a kind of knowing. By the time the final bus pulled into the stop near the church, it had begun to rain. Not a downpour, just a steady, persistent drizzle that makes you pull your coat closer and walk a little faster. The street outside the chapel was lined with cars. Black coats, tense umbrellas, suits that didn't quite fit. I saw them all through the blur of rain and window glass. My family, my name, my place, just without me. And still, I stepped off the bus. The rain welcomed me like an old song. Not the cheerful kind, not the hopeful crescendo, but the quiet kind. The kind Joan used to hum when the world felt too loud. The kind you don't sing for anyone else, just for yourself. Just to say, I showed up. The church stood solemn beneath the gray sky, its steeple rising like a quiet exclamation into the clouds. Rain had begun to gather in the cracks of the sidewalk, pooling at the edges of the steps in small, trembling mirrors. I walked slowly toward the door, the coat heavy on my shoulders, the brooch hidden inside, pressing faintly against my chest like a heartbeat. I could hear the music before I saw the people. Organ pipes, slow and full, the kind of hymn you don't recognize by name, but know in your bones. It rolled out through the stone like breath from a tired chest. Familiar. Final. My fingers reached for the brass handle on the church door and stopped. Through the frosted glass, I could see shapes, silhouettes in motion, heads bowed, shoulders hunched in grief or respect. I couldn't tell which. Somewhere near the front, I glimpsed my son. He stood with his back straight, hands clasped, eyes fixed forward, his wife beside him, my granddaughter Zoe in black tights, legs swinging slightly from the pew, not quite reaching the floor. They looked complete without me. Whole. I stood there for a moment, hand still poised at the door, waiting for something I couldn't name. Maybe a glance over the shoulder, maybe a sudden ache in one of them, the sense that something, someone, was missing. Maybe they'd remember I existed. I waited. And then, a small breath escaped my lips. No one turned. No one looked toward the door. I lowered my hand. The stone steps were damp, but not yet slick. I sat on the second one from the top, pulling the coat tighter around me as the rain began to thicken into something steadier. The organ swelled inside the church, and I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the sound pass through me. There, on that step, I let myself believe, just briefly, that someone might come out. Maybe my son would excuse himself quietly and step into the vestibule. Maybe he'd glance toward the entry, catch sight of me sitting there, and something in his chest would loosen. He'd come down the steps without a word, just a look, and offer his hand. Or perhaps Zoe would tug on her mother's sleeve and say, "Where's Grandma?" With that puzzled frown she used to wear when something felt off. And her mother, swallowing her pride or her plans, would say, "She's outside. Go bring her in." I almost believed it. I almost stood, almost knocked. But the doors never opened, and the organ played on. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the folded notepad, edges curled from handling. My fingers were cold, the pencil faint against the dampening paper, but I found the page with the eulogy, and read it softly to myself. Not for them, for her. For Joan, I whispered. My sister, my singer, my last witness. I'm here. A few drops fell onto the page. I don't know if they came from the sky or from me, and the pencil marks blurred into a soft gray smudge. But I kept reading, voice low and steady. I loved you more than they knew. I remember your laugh on my wedding day. I remember the way you held my hand when I was scared. I remember the song you sang and the promise you made. You showed up, always, and I'm here now, even if they didn't want me to be. A car passed on the road behind me, tires whispering through puddles. From somewhere close by, a bird called once, and then went silent again. Still, no one came. The rain fell heavier now. A stranger passed with an umbrella and paused when he saw me sitting there. He looked about 30, suit damp at the shoulders, his expression unreadable. "Ma'am," he said gently, holding out the umbrella. I shook my head. "I want to feel it." He nodded once, not confused, not pitying, just understanding, and moved on. And I sat, long after the music faded, long after the doors closed, long after I knew no one would come. There's a particular kind of heartbreak that doesn't scream or sob. It simply exhales, quietly, like the last note of a song played for no one. That's what I felt as the final hymn ended and the silence settled again. Not rejection. That would have required intention. This was smaller, more subtle. An absence mistaken for unimportance. A love remembered only by the one who still carried it. The ceremony ended. I saw them filing out. Dark coats, tight shoulders, low voices. My son moved among them, shaking hands, eyes dry. Zoe clutched her mother's fingers, her small frame dwarfed by all that grown-up grief. For one moment, as they crossed the threshold, he looked toward the steps. Our eyes met. He didn't flinch, didn't speak, but he didn't look away either. We just saw each other. A flicker, maybe guilt, maybe something softer, but no gesture followed it. He turned away, and the crowd swallowed him whole. I sat for a few minutes more, then stood, bones stiff from the cold, shoes wet at the seams. My notepad went back into the coat pocket, the words now smudged beyond saving. I looked at the church one last time, then turned and began to walk. The cemetery was a few blocks away. They hadn't invited me to that either, but I had something in my pocket, a flower I'd picked from my own garden before leaving. Small, white, a bloom she used to call paper stars. I would leave it at the gate. They wouldn't notice, but that wasn't the point. The walk to the cemetery was short, but it felt like miles. Every step sank heavier than the one before, like my shoes were filling with water, like the sidewalk itself didn't want me moving forward. My body obeyed, but only because it didn't know what else to do. I wasn't following a procession. There was no soft murmur of mourners ahead, no shared glances, no arms brushing mine for comfort. Just me, just the soft slap of wet soles against pavement and the muted rhythm of my breath, shallow and uneven. I kept my eyes on the gate ahead, not because it offered comfort, but because it was the only thing in sight that hadn't turned away. It was one of those old wrought iron gates, the kind with rust blooming along the bottom edges and ivy gripping the side columns, like it didn't want to let go. The stone sign above read Oakvale Memorial, the letters worn to a whisper. I'd been here before, years ago, when Joan's first husband passed. We were younger then. She had leaned on me that day, her fingers digging into my wrist, as if grief needed something physical to hold on to. Now it was my fingers that trembled, but there was no one to steady them. I stopped at the entrance. Didn't go in. I hadn't come to visit the plot. I didn't know where they'd buried her exactly, and I wasn't about to ask. That knowledge had been reserved for those who'd chosen the flowers, signed the paperwork, booked the flights. My name wasn't on any of those lines. So I stayed at the gate. Reaching slowly into my coat pocket, I pulled out the small flower I'd brought, a single white camellia, clipped from the bush near my kitchen window, the one Joan gave me years ago, back when my garden was still something people admired. She called them paper stars, even though she knew the name wasn't right. "They're stubborn," she said once, brushing the petals with her thumb. "They bloom through frost, just to remind the world they're not done yet." I laid it gently at the base of the gate. It didn't look like much, just a small, bruised bloom on a cracked sidewalk. But it was everything I had left to offer. The wind picked up, not sharp, just persistent. It pulled at the hem of my coat and pushed my hair into my face. I let it. For a long time, I stood still, not praying, not thinking, just being. The ache in my back, the weight behind my eyes, the stiffness in my knees, none of it compared to the heaviness inside. A hollowness that echoed like an empty room you used to live in, now stripped of furniture and warmth. I didn't feel sad exactly. Sad is something you feel when there's still energy to cry. This was quieter, colder, like I'd poured out every last drop of myself into a family that hadn't noticed I was emptying. I thought about all the things I hadn't said at the service, because I wasn't invited to speak, because there was no seat saved for me, because the only seat I'd claimed was stone and soaked in rain. I thought of the song Joan sang at my wedding, the one that had filled the room with her crooked voice and made me feel held. I remembered the way she'd winked at me during the chorus, off-key and unashamed. That wink had meant, "You matter." And now I felt like the old coat you keep in the hall closet, out of obligation, just in case someone needs it. But no one ever does. Not anymore. My legs began to shake, and I lowered myself onto the bench just outside the gate. It was slick from the rain, but I didn't care. The cold had already made itself at home inside me. I let my hands rest in my lap, palms up, empty. It's strange, the moment you realize no one's waiting for you to come home, that the lights will be off unless you turn them on, that no one will ask how the service was. No one will pour you tea or say, "Tell me what you remember." Because what I remember doesn't matter to them. Because what I carry, quietly, alone, doesn't fit into their carefully scheduled lives. They've taken the grief that belonged to both of us and portioned it out among themselves, like slices of cake at a reception. Neat, managed, disconnected from the girl who held Joan's hair back when she had the flu. From the woman who sat beside her through chemo and hummed lullabies in waiting rooms. From me. There was a time I used to think I was irreplaceable, not in a prideful way, just in the quiet, maternal way that only people who give too much understand. You raise the babies, you hold the feverish hands, you host the holidays and make the casseroles no one thanks you for. You keep every birthday on a calendar. You send notes. You remember the names of coworkers and ex-boyfriends and old school teachers, just in case. And then, slowly, you become the background to their lives. You get quieter, smaller, and one day, you're not even on the list. I didn't cry. The tears had already come, years ago, when they first started forgetting to ask, forgetting to include, forgetting that I had stories of my own, that I had a right to stand beside the casket, a right to say her name, a right to be seen. "I'm so tired," I whispered aloud. Not to anyone, just to the bench, to the rain, to the sky above. Tired in a way that has nothing to do with sleep. Tired in the way a stone grows tired after decades of being stepped on. Worn smooth, erased. I don't know how long I sat there. The rain slowed to a drizzle, then a mist. My coat clung to me, damp and heavy. My hands felt stiff, my feet numb. But I didn't move, because sometimes the only thing you have left is the sitting, the choosing to remain when the world has walked on. The simple act of saying, "I am still here," even if no one is listening, even if it no longer matters. The rain had softened by the time they arrived. I didn't mean to wait for them, not consciously, but something in me stayed rooted to that bench like an old tree refusing to fall, even when the wind has long moved on. I heard the cars before I saw them, tires pressing gravel, doors creaking open, muffled conversations wrapped in the hush that follows a funeral. The gate I'd stood before, the one I'd left my flower beside, groaned faintly as someone pushed it wide. They came in slow, pairs and trios in black coats and muted scarves. Some held hands, others walked with the tired gait of people who think grief is a destination, as if arriving at the grave itself will finally unlock something closure, clarity, or just the permission to stop pretending they know how to mourn. My son was near the end of the group. He walked stiffly, shoulders square, a plastic bag swinging from one wrist. Likely the framed photo of Joan they displayed at the front of the church. His eyes were dry, but his mouth was set in that same tight line I'd seen so many times over the years. The one he wore when he didn't want to feel too much. And then he looked up, saw me. It wasn't dramatic. He didn't stop walking, didn't gasp or call out, just noticed. Our eyes met across the space between the gate and the bench. He hesitated. That was all. One foot stilled in the gravel, the other hovering for just a breath longer than it should have. The slightest pause, barely a full second, but I saw it, felt it, like the tremor that comes just before a quake. A question flickered behind his gaze. It might have been regret. It might have been nothing more than recognition. A noticing that someone was where she wasn't expected to be. But for the first time in weeks, I felt visible. No words, no apology, no sudden change of heart. Just that tiny, sharp moment when someone who has overlooked you for too long finally blinks and realizes. You're still here. He moved on. Of course he did. They always move on. But the pause lingered after him, clinging to the space like smoke after a match has burned down. And that's when it happened. Not an epiphany, not a bolt of clarity, but a slow warmth under the ribs. A stirring, small but undeniable. I wasn't angry. I didn't feel triumphant or vindicated, just certain. Something had shifted, not in them, in me. I sat still a few minutes longer, watching the procession disappear into the far side of the cemetery, swallowed by trees and headstones and the hush of gathered sorrow. Then I looked down at my hands, wrinkled, damp, still open in my lap. I flexed them slowly. They still worked. They could still hold things, still write things, still choose things. I had spent too many years shrinking myself to fit into the spaces other people allowed. Polite silences, small thank yous, careful deflections, waiting for permission that never came. I'd waited for birthdays to be remembered, for seats to be offered, for anyone to say, "We need you." But the truth whispered louder now, steadier than it ever had. I didn't need permission to love. I didn't need permission to mourn. And I certainly didn't need their confirmation to remember who I had been before they made me optional. I thought of Joan, of the way she sang without being asked, of how she always left room at the table, even for people who forgot to RSVP, of the way she stood in every room like she deserved to be there, and how, somehow, that made you believe you did too. If she had been sitting here now, next to me on this cold bench, she would have bumped her shoulder against mine and said something like, "You gonna sit here forever, or are we walking home with our heads high?" She would have told me to get up, not to forget, but to continue. I wasn't ready to stand just yet, but I wasn't frozen anymore either. Somewhere between the cemetery gate and that half-second glance from my son, something old and buried had stirred. Not a plan, not a reaction, just a seed, a small rooted, knowing that I didn't want to end here on this bench, outside the gate, waiting for someone to remember I existed. I had words left to say, things left to reclaim, and love still warm and aching left to give, whether they wanted it or not. The rain had stopped entirely now. I looked up at the sky. It wasn't clear, not yet, but it wasn't angry either, just open, gray and watchful, like a page waiting for the next line. And for the first time in a long while, I let myself believe I might still have a few lines left to write. I didn't take the bus back, not because I couldn't, but because I didn't want to sit still anymore. I had been still long enough years, really. Quiet in corners, careful with my grief, careful with my joy, always waiting for the right moment to matter. So I walked 5.5 miles from the cemetery gate to the front porch I had swept every Tuesday since 1983. My shoes were still damp, but the rain had passed, leaving behind the kind of air that feels like a second chance, cool, clean, full of something unnamed. It wasn't a march. It wasn't a performance. It was just me. One step at a time, forward. On sidewalks cracked with roots, past chain-link fences and front lawns, speckled with plastic flamingos and sagging mailboxes, I walked through the ordinary, the forgotten, the in-between, the place I've lived most of my life. Along the way, I passed the old diner where Joan and I used to split a slice of pie and 2 cups of coffee on payday Fridays. It had a new sign now, flashier, with modern lettering that didn't quite suit the building's tired bricks. But the booth by the window was still there. We had laughed in that booth until our sides hurt. Cried there too once when she told me she was leaving her first husband. She had wiped her nose with a napkin and said, "People forget that leaving is also a kind of loving. Sometimes you love yourself enough to go." I hadn't understood that fully until today. 2 blocks later, I stopped outside the community bulletin board nailed to the side of the post office. Flyers for dog walkers, piano lessons, lost cats, and a pancake breakfast at the Presbyterian church fluttered in the breeze. I reached into my bag, pulled out my notepad, ripped a page from the middle clean, unwritten. With the stub of a pencil I always carried, I wrote just one sentence. Love doesn't wait for permission. I pinned it between two staples, just above a neon poster for line dancing lessons. No one would know it was mine, and it didn't matter. It was a note to myself, a note to anyone who needed it. When I got home, the driveway was empty. They wouldn't be back for hours. Travel time, traffic, maybe a post-funeral meal where they'd toast to Joan and tell sanitized stories of her youth. The kind that leave out the messy bits, the real bits. I unlocked the door. The house smelled of fabric softener and lemon floor cleaner. No life, just maintenance. I hung the coat by the door, slipped off my shoes, and went straight to the hall closet. For years, I had tucked things away, their old scarves, forgotten coats, boxes of cards and ornaments no one asked about. But today I reached for the top shelf and pulled down the faded green photo album. The one Joan made me in '87 after my second surgery. She'd titled it Midge's Magic in glitter pen and lined the inside with pictures of me in every shade of motherhood and mischief. I carried it to the kitchen table, set it down, and opened it. Not out of nostalgia, not out of longing, but out of claiming. Because these pages, these stories were mine, because I mattered in them. And I wasn't going to let those parts of me fade away just because they made others uncomfortable. I spent the rest of the afternoon sorting photographs. Some I hadn't seen in decades. There was one of me in Joan's old coat, arms spread wide on a sledding hill, cheeks red with cold and joy. One of us in matching flannel pajamas, holding mugs of cocoa in front of a fire that had long gone out. One of me alone, standing at the stove, my back turned, but you could see Joan's handwriting on the caption. She always fed us more than food. I took out a blank journal. On the first page, I wrote, "For the parts of me no one bothered to remember." And then I began. Not for them, for me. For the girl who used to climb trees and sing into box fans. For the woman who remembered birthdays and bandaged scraped knees. For the sister who held a hand in waiting rooms and never left first. For Midge. That night, I cooked a full dinner. Roast chicken, garlic potatoes, green beans, bright with lemon. No one else was home, and still I set the table for two. One for me, and one for the sister who used to sing. I placed a single white flower in a glass by her plate. The camellia I'd left at the gate, that was for the world. This was ours. I sat down, picked up my fork, and whispered, "You're not the only one who shows up, Joni." Outside, the wind moved gently through the trees. No applause, no grand signs, just the sound of someone still here, still loving, still choosing. The next morning, I woke before the sun, not to the clatter of dishes or the shuffle of early risers, but to silence. Deep, padded silence, the kind that fills a room when no one expects anything from you anymore. I lay there for a moment, eyes open, staring at the faint outlines of the ceiling, and then I rose, not because I had to, but because I was ready. The house was dim, still smelling faintly of lemon polish and yesterday's roast. I moved through it barefoot, careful not to disturb the quiet, though there was no one to disturb. The others wouldn't be back for hours yet. They'd be tired from travel, from polite conversation, from pretending their grief was enough. I didn't resent them for that. Not anymore. But I also didn't wait for them. Not this time. In the hallway, just beside the pantry door, hung the family calendar. A large one-magnetic, whiteboard style, with bright markers in 4 different colors. Each name had its hue: blue for my son, purple for his wife, green for Zoe, and pink for the youngest, whose soccer games always ran long. I had no color. Never had. They used to include me in notes once. Mom's appointment, or grandma pickup, or dinner at mom's. But those were logistical mentions, footnotes. Not belonging, not presence. And now? Now there was nothing. I stared at it for a long moment. August, dotted with dentist appointments, rehearsals, grocery runs, and Zoom meetings. There, in the corner, written in a child's shaky hand, was Joan's funeral. No time listed, no location, no details, just her name. A single word, small, fading. Just like me. I reached up and took it off the wall. Not violently, not with anger, just steady, deliberate. The magnets fell softly to the tile floor with a click. I didn't pick them up. Instead, I carried the board to the garage, past the shelves where my holiday linens gathered dust, past the bin of broken toys I once begged them to fix, and placed it gently atop the pile of recycling. It wasn't a protest. It wasn't punishment. It was a farewell. Not to Joan, but to waiting, to wondering when I would be remembered, to holding space in a life that had moved on without asking if I wanted to follow. Back inside, I returned to the hallway and stood in the empty spot where the calendar had hung, a patch of wall slightly cleaner than the rest. Bare, honest, mine. I reached into the drawer and pulled out a small nail and a frame. Nothing large, just a 5x7 photograph I'd found the night before while digging through Joan's old letters. It showed the two of us at ages 12 and 14, grinning wildly with matching crooked teeth, our arms slung around each other like ropes made of love. I hung it where the calendar had been. Centered. Still. No labels. No colors. Just the two of us. Present. I stepped back and looked at it, at the absence of everyone else, at the fullness of us. And for the first time in months, I felt something settle in my chest. Not sorrow, not joy. Something firmer, like a stone that finally found the bottom of the river. I didn't leave a note, didn't call to explain. When they came home that evening and saw the calendar gone, they'd ask where it went. Maybe someone would suggest buying a new one. Maybe they'd assign me a color this time, orange or gray, something neutral. But I wouldn't be there to mark it. That part of me, the part that waited to be assigned, scheduled, included, was done, finished, folded into the past with the dried petals of a camellia and a pencil-worn eulogy no one heard but me. Instead, I made tea, not the shared pot I used to brew for everyone, hoping someone would sit down and join me. Just 1 cup, English breakfast, 2 sugars, no milk. I carried it to the front porch, sat in the rocker, and watched the sky lighten from slate to silver to soft, unsure blue. Joan used to say morning was her favorite time because no one's ruined it yet. I smiled at the memory, sipped my tea, and whispered to the wind, "Goodbye, sweetheart." Not because she was gone, but because I finally knew I wasn't. It's strange how a life can shift without thunder, no great upheaval, no final confrontation or shouting match, just a series of small, unspoken decisions. A silence that deepens not into loneliness, but into knowing. I spent the next few days in stillness, not frozen, not lost, just still. Like a field that's been harvested, lying fallow not because it's done, but because it's gathering. The house remained unchanged. Shoes by the door, mugs on the counter, mail stacked on the hall table, waiting to be sorted. But something in the air felt different now. The kind of different you can't name, but you feel it. The heaviness had lifted, not because anything had been fixed, but because I'd stopped holding what didn't belong to me anymore. Their guilt, their permission, their version of who I was allowed to be. It didn't weigh me down now, not the way it used to. They never asked where I went that day, not directly. My son paused in the kitchen once, looking at the missing calendar, his brow furrowed. He held a new one in his hand, brand new, glossy, with bright colored squares. But he didn't hang it. Maybe he couldn't find the magnets. Maybe he noticed the photo instead. The one of Joan and me, arms tangled, mouths open in laughter. He didn't ask about it, but he didn't move it either. Zoe found me on the porch later that week. She didn't say anything at first, just stood by the railing, watching the neighborhood go by like it always does. Dogs barking, sprinklers hissing, wind tugging at branches, like a mother smoothing down a child's hair. Finally, she said, "I saw your name in Grandpa's photo album." I turned to look at her. "In the wedding pictures," she added. "You looked happy. Different." I smiled. That was a good day. She sat beside me on the step. We didn't talk about the funeral. We didn't need to. Her presence was enough. Small and sincere, like a hand resting gently on grief without trying to fix it. I didn't bring it up again, didn't retell what I'd done, didn't demand recognition or apologies. I didn't need them anymore. What I needed, what I'd always needed, was to know that the love I carried didn't require permission to exist. And I knew that now. I had loved Joan fully. I had shown up. And not even the locked doors or missing invitations could change that. Somewhere deep inside, a part of me had been waiting for the world to notice when I disappeared. But that part has gone quiet now. Because I see myself. Because I remember. And that's enough. I go on walks now. Longer ones. I take my tea in the garden and clip fresh flowers for the table, even when no one else will see them. I cook dinners that make the house smell like something's happening, like someone still lives here, because someone does. Not just a grandmother or a helper or a ride giver or a babysitter or an extra chair at Christmas, but a woman, a sister, a soul, still tender, still strong, still writing the ending in her own hand. The photo stays on the wall now, just above where the calendar once hung. No one touches it. It doesn't need a frame of gold or a caption in cursive. It just is. And every time I pass it, I nod, just a little. To her. To me. To the promise we made as girls, huddled in the rain. We'll always show up. I was told to stay home, to rest, to let them go without me, that it would be too much. But love doesn't listen, not the real kind. It walks in the rain. It sits on stone steps. It carries its own eulogy in a pocket. Not to be read aloud, but to be remembered. It shows up, even when the door stays shut, even when no one saves it a seat, even when the world forgets. Because love knows. Presence isn't a place on a list. It's the way you choose, again and again. I wasn't invited to say goodbye, but I did, in the only way I knew how, by showing up, by staying soft, by surviving. And now? Now I walk a little taller. I speak when I have something to say. And I sit at the table with both hands open ready not to wait, but to live, fully, deliberately, beautifully uninvited,